Good morning, everyone. There's still people coming in, but I think we'll just start. And thank you for coming to this joint webinar between Hudson McKenzie, Icon Relocations, and Kingston Smith, where we're talking about how Brexit has impacted international employment within Europe. And obviously, we're going to talk about relocations to Europe as well. And anybody that woke up this morning to the rain on this in July in the UK is probably thinking that they could do with relocating to a sunnier part of Europe themselves. I know that's what I thought this morning. But I'm delighted to be joined by four great speakers. There's we've got my one of our partners inside Kingston Smith. We've got Rachel Donaghy, who's our employment tax manager, and we've got Neera Segaran from Hudson McKenzie, who's a senior immigration manager. And I'm delighted as well to be joined this morning by Andrew and Ben, who are both from Icon Relocations. So we're going to take you through a whistle-stop tour this morning around how the Brexit has affected us and what the challenges are. And I know that as businesses are struggling to get back to work and we're seeing restrictions lifted, that we're seeing hybrid working and home working becoming more of the norm. But what happens when home isn't the UK and people want to be abroad, and what happens when you're wanting to put your UK employees overseas as well? So we're going to start this morning with Neera, and she's going to take us through can we have the next slide? Thank you. She's going to give us a bit of an overview of Hudson McKenzie, and then we're going to move on to Rachel with Kingston Smith. Then we're going to talk to the guys about Icon, and we're going to do a few case studies, and we're going to mix it up a bit. So it'll be quite interesting. So we've got a lot to get through in the next 45 minutes, and then we're going to leave 15 minutes at the end for questions. So can I just ask you to put the questions in the Q&A? It's very difficult in the chat, but post what you can, and we'll get through as many as we can. And if we can't get through all of it, then we'll send a follow-up at the end, and we'll come back to you in the next couple of days, and we will be sending the slides out and a copy of the recording as well. Okay, great. So Neera, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Richard, for that, and welcome everybody to our session. I'm really looking forward to talking about immigration. We at Hudson McKenzie have been operating in the immigration sphere for over 10 years, predominantly in UK immigration, but we also have a global footprint as well. I'm going to concentrate on the key kind of changes that have occurred since December 2020 in the UK. There's probably been a lot of news around the changes that have occurred in the UK, and it's predominantly around what's called the new points-based system. As you can imagine, with Brexit, European nationals are now required to obtain work permission just like anybody else. Previously, they benefited from what's called freedom of movement, and they were able to come to the UK to work and to study and reside here without any kind of implications. Now they're brought into the same mix, and the response from the Home Office was to incorporate them into the work permit process as well. So essentially, what's a sponsor license? A sponsor license enables a UK company to essentially recruit and hire people from overseas to work in the UK. There's kind of stringent requirements around that as well. So they will need to be an established company in the UK. They'll need to show the kind of compliance requirements as well before obtaining a sponsor license. We have seen an increase in sponsor license applications since January, and this is largely with companies responding to the fact that they do need to have Europeans working in the UK. We imagine this will kind of snowball over the next year or so. We found it was quiet before because of the pandemic, but we've certainly seen that increasing over the last few months. We have seen delays in processing, so good old-fashioned Home Office trying to be efficient. They initially said applications would be processed within a few weeks, but actually they're taking around 12 weeks. And there are a lot of glitches onto the system. The system hasn't been changed since 2008, unbelievably. And the typical phrase they have is that they're working on it. So let's see. The two kind of routes, so once a company's actually got a sponsor license, there's two fundamental routes. There's what's called the skilled worker route and also the intra-company transfer route. So I'll talk a little bit about those. The skilled worker route allows individuals to come to the UK to work up to 5 years, and then they're able to apply for permanent residency, which is very beneficial to companies. Now, they've lowered a lot of the requirements around that. It used to be what's called RQF level 6, and that's approximately a degree level. They've lowered that to A level to kind of accommodate European workers in the various jobs that they saw in terms of that skill set. Benefits of that, like I said, is that companies can continue to employ individuals that were previously working without permission, and they can do that for up to 5 years. The other route is the intercompany transfer route. This is basically if the company wants to transfer individuals from the overseas office to the UK, the minimum salary level is around 41,500 as opposed to the skilled worker, which is around 25,600. And the key change, I guess the difference between the two is that the ICT 12 months employment is needed unless the salary is over 73,900, and it doesn't lead to settlement. But it works quite well for companies that just want to transfer people over for a short period of time. Another key change as well, and I guess it's not listed on here, but what companies should be aware of is the government charges that are also associated with these applications. For example, for an intra-company transfer or also for a skilled worker visa, you could be paying up to £10,000 approximately in terms of government fees for a 5-year work permit. And if this person wants to bring over a family of 4, you're looking at about £20,000. And I think it's quite important to raise that as well in terms of your forward planning. Thank you very much. So that's just an overview of the skilled worker and IC2 routes, and I'm going to hand over to Rachel now.
Hi, thanks, Nira. As Richard said, my name's Rachel Donachie. I'm part of the Kingston Smith employment taxes team. I'm a relatively new member actually, but I specialise in UK domestic employment tax, so payroll, and various related issues, but my real specialism is global mobility, so moving people around the world. And actually prior to being here, I actually was on the other side, so where some of you guys are. So I sat in-house and did an in-house role for a couple of years, so sometimes know how you're feeling. Although I was billed as talking about tax today, I was actually going to talk about social security, which has predominantly come to light in the last 6 months due to the changes of Brexit. I think it's sort of all got forgotten about with COVID-19, and sort of came in at very last minute from the 1st of January. Actually, the announcements came in after that date. So first of all, I thought I'd start by saying, what are the EU social security rules, or what were they? And indeed, these are rules which apply to any country around the world where the UK has a social security reciprocal agreement. So essentially, the rules are in place to prevent an individual from being subject to social security in more than one jurisdiction. So you'd only look for someone to be paying social security in one country, both the employee and the employer contributions. So the general rule has always been that contributions are paid in the country where the work is performed. And this is unless one of the one of the conditions applies in terms of it being a short-term assignment, where people are working in more than one country or more than one member state, and there are some very limited circumstances where the rules don't apply as well, which I won't be covering today. But those are the general principles of what's always applied between UK member states and the UK and indeed other countries around the world where we have a reciprocal agreement with. So lots and lots of discussions prior to the 1st of January as to what was going to happen with social security, and was it all going to be doom and gloom, and we'd be negotiating different things for different countries, but actually the rules that the UK EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement rules, which contain the social security part, which became applicable from the 1st of January, actually largely replicate what was there previously. So very much, very little has changed, sorry, in terms of the social security sort of rules that were in place. So the only thing to really note of importance is that the new rules, which applies from the 1st of January, that any individuals that were covered by the old rules, so were in another country under the old rules prior to the 1st of January, are allowed to use grandfathering rules of the old social security rules. So that becomes a bit more important as I talk through the slides. But I think the main takeaway is that not a great deal has changed, fortunately, for us. So that is good news. So the new rules continue to state that social security is due in a country where the work is performed, with the exception for detached workers. So those are individuals that are sent overseas to another country for a temporary period to work. or if you're a multi-state worker, so where you're working in more than one jurisdiction over the course of a year. So detached worker rules. So these are for employees who can be sent on assignment between the UK and another member state, and they can remain in their home country social security, so UK social security in this case, for a period of up to 24 months. And this is providing they are not replacing another detached worker. So you can't have a continuous cycle of sending an assignee to replace another assignee and still be able to take advantage of remaining in home country social security. So the only real difference in the current rules, or the new rules, compared to the old rules, are that there is no provision beyond the 24-month period to extend. So prior to 1st of January, if you were sent on assignment to an EU member state, you could apply for your certificate to remain in home country social security, would initially be granted for 24 months, but you could make an application to extend. So the main significant difference under the new rules is that 24-month period. That's it. There's nothing beyond the 24 months. And I think that becomes an important planning point, because you don't want anyone to trip over the 24-month period and have to pay overseas social security, especially if you're in somewhere like France, which is extortionate, or indeed the employee might not want to pay. So you know, careful planning, I think, in assignments beyond 24 months. You're still required to apply for a certificate of coverage, or an A1, as it's known within Europe. And the certificate of coverage should be applied for from the home country. So if it's UK to France, then it needs to be applied for in the UK. The only other point is that every EU country has the right to opt out. So they could give very little notice and opt out of these agreements. So within the space of a month, you could be into another social security system. But that hasn't happened as yet, but something to bear in mind for the future. So the other group of workers, so our traditional multi-state workers, where you're working in more than one jurisdiction, fundamentally there's no change at all. So EU, UK member states are still automatically covered by the multi-state worker rules. Social security is payable where you're habitually resident and where you perform substantive duties. So that would be where habitually resident would tend to be where your home is, so where your family, social economic ties are. Substantive duties is anywhere you spend more than 25% of your time performing work activity. And again, that's applied for in the home country, so where you'd be wanting to pay your social security in. The only final point on all of this is that there are some special rules involving Norway, Switzerland, Iceland and Liechtenstein around. So for Norway, for example, you can get a certificate for 3 years. Iceland is only one with a 1-year extension, and Liechtenstein, there are no rules. So if you have anyone going there, you could potentially be into Liechtenstein social security, and 52-week rules would apply in the UK. So they're just some oddities in the countries, combinations that I thought would be worth mentioning. But that's it for a summary on the social security, and it's now over to Ben.
Thank you, Rachel. Icon Relocation, we've been working in terms of Hudson McKenzie and more Kingston Smith, and we basically are 35 strong in team, based in London, Singapore and Aberdeen, and we service, predominantly our specialism is relocation DSP and also household goods, along with other concierge services. In principle, since Brexit, I think the one main takeout that we can give here is that we can't actually do any of our roles without immigration being in place to start with. Whereas before, you know, people had equal rights, and we could, in Europe, and we could action straight away. And that will come across when we do the case studies. But we're very pleased to be presenting today.
Great, thank you very much, guys. There's, okay, let's go on to our first case study, because this is quite an interesting one. So, okay, so Remy is a French national who lives with her family near Paris. She's been employed by the French business for 20 years. She is assigned to the UK company for 2 years and is due to arrive in the UK on the 5th of February 2022. The UK sister company holds the sponsorship license. During her stay, Remy will spend 40% of her working year performing duties outside of the UK. Remy's partner and 16-year-old son will be accompanying her on the assignment, and the company will pay the costs for the travel to the UK, their accommodation and relocations, one home trip each year, and the cost of her son attending international school. Remy will continue to be a member of the French firm's pension scheme whilst on assignment. The French firm has agreed to cover Remy by the global tax equalisation policy while she is on assignment. Okay, Neera, tell us about your bit.
Thank you. Yeah, so as I was discussing before, Remy should need to enter under the new points-based system. Previously, if this was before last year, then she would have been able to enter without any problems. It's good that the company holds a sponsor license because they'll be able to sponsor her. And as I mentioned, because she's been working for the firm for over 12 months, she can enter as an intercompany transferee as well. Her salary would need to be over the 41,500, so they'd need to make sure that those requirements are met. She can bring her son over because they could be a dependent on her visa, but unfortunately she won't be able to apply for indefinite leave to remain or settlement after 5 years. However, she can switch into the skilled worker visa at any point, which then she'll start the 5 years clock at that point, and then can apply for indefinite leave to remain if she requires. Thank you.
Yeah, so just I thought I would cover off the tax and the social security advice for Remy, just because the social security bit wouldn't take very long. But from a tax perspective, then Remy is going to be taxable in the UK from her arrival, and will need to go onto a UK payroll, which could either be a shadow payroll if she's still going to be paid from home or via her home country employment, or even a modified payroll scheme as she's coming here on a tax equalised basis. Would be some tax reliefs potentially available for her, so she's going to be spending some time working outside of the UK. So providing she sets up the right banking structure and doesn't remit certain funds to the UK, then she can claim some tax relief for the days that she spends working outside of the UK. She's only coming here for, I think, up to 2 years, so any accommodation can be claimed as sort of tax relief, tax exempt for her, and also she'd be entitled to sort of relocation allowance and her home leave as well. It isn't taxable either, so it's potentially some good relief from a tax perspective for her, especially given the 2-year assignment period. Gross ups will be required because she's tax equalised, so the company are paying the tax on her behalf whilst she's here, so that's regarded as a benefit in kind, and so any payment that's made or benefit provided will have to be grossed up, and indeed will add some additional cost obviously to the company and the cost of the assignment. And then from a social security perspective, then she's being seconded, so she's she's a detached worker coming from France to the UK for the right period of time, so should apply for a certificate of coverage in France to continue paying social security there. Obviously just worth noting the point about extensions not being granted, so if she were asked to stay a bit longer.
Okay, just as a new person to the group, my name is Andrew Whiffin. I've been at Icon Relocation for 10 years now. I have 20 years experience in the mobility sector. I currently look after a lot of the larger accounts for the group, and I thrive on thinking outside of the box. So look, going back to Remy and her situation and her family moving to the UK, the first step, really, the family would need an initial call with us. And this would be to discuss requirements in detail, along with needs, and finally agree a timeline. Areas in the UK during the call would be discussed along with current availability, but carefully managing expectations. As we all know, certain areas in the UK, the stock is low and rental rates are high. For example, suitable properties for Remy and family in the Surrey area, a modest 3 or 4 bedroom property along the M3 or A3 corridor will be circular to around £2,500 to £3,100 per month unfurnished. Stamp duty is also something to consider, as this is applicable on anything over £125,000 PA. Other aspects discussed would be household effects of removal requirement. If the family are considering to ship any effect, which you probably will, as a lot of the homes in that area are unfurnished, a video move survey will be discussed. The TOR or transfer of residence process explained and the appointment arranged. A transfer of residence sounds really complicated, but basically it's an electronic numbering system operated by HM Customs. Once the move survey is completed and the family are happy with the dates and discussions during the move survey, of course, the packing and transport costs are submitted to the corporate account for consideration review. Lastly, but probably the most important thing with regards to the relocation would be schooling. Schooling is of paramount importance, as it is a deciding factor in most cases when choosing a new home. If the family are considering the French lycée, for example, it is near on impossible as it's always full. Nearby international schools in the Surrey area, places are limited and the private sector is problematic. However, with our relationships and available bursaries, we'll be able to assist to find suitable places. If it is safe to travel here in the UK, temporary accommodation will be sourced and secured within budget and then agreed, and pre-discussed properties within the own budget can be viewed virtually or, if safe to do so, physically with an Icon Relocation consultant. Throughout the process, a one-person contact would be managed, ensuring that the assignee experience is upheld, and obviously manage any upfront payments if need be. Richard, thank you.
Well, thanks very much. There's loads of questions on that, but I think we'll do the questions at the end if that's okay, and we'll come back to each of the case studies separately. So, okay, so we've got another one. So let's go for this one. So this is working the other way. So David is a British engineer employed by a UK company. David is assigned to work at a Polish company's manufacturing premises for an initial 12-month period commencing the 30th of July. David plans to leave the UK on the 15th of July, and his assignment may be extended to December next year. During his assignment, David remains in the UK company retirement benefit scheme. His family will join him before school starts in September, and residence is secured in Krakow. The company will pay David's accommodation and subsistence costs in Poland. Okay, Nira, over to you.
Thank you. So basically, from the 1st of January 2021, UK nationals are treated just as any other non-EU nationals. So again, whereas they would have benefited from the freedom of movement, they also need to get work permission, etc., sorted out. The company itself in Poland would need to sponsor him and become a recognised sponsor first of all. There are expedited processing times and fewer supporting documents if they were to do that. The process is that he'd apply for an EU ICT work and residence authorization, and at the moment we are seeing delays with that process. And then he would only need to enter into Poland. He doesn't need to get a visa itself, and then attend an immigration office to get the actual right to work sorted out. Finally, there's a town hall registration that he'd need to go through, and then he'd need to obtain a social fiscal number in line with that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so from a tax and social security point of view, David, certainly from a tax point of view, could potentially be slightly more complicated. Potentially he could remain tax resident and taxable here in the UK if he's still got family here and travelling back, certainly for an initial period of time. So potentially a requirement to operate a UK payroll and a Polish payroll for him. Obviously, there's a double tax treaty between the two countries, so ultimately there's no tax to pay twice, but there would be some sort of cash flow and admin processes to set up if dual payroll is required for him. But again, he can apply for a certificate of coverage in the UK to continue paying UK NIC. But again, mentions an assignment extension. So if it did go beyond the 24 months, then that wouldn't be granted.
Ben, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. David's very lucky going to Krakow as a town which has a population of 800,000. It's a very good balance of life to live in. It's really important that Nira and her colleagues have done their piece first before we get involved. We recommend that because David is going ahead of his family, that he would basically rent a furnished property in a very top class area for about £550 sterling a month. And then after that, perhaps follow on to a furnished property, a 4-bedroom, of about £1,500 a month once his family joined him. In terms of education, we'd obviously do a needs assessment to make sure that we had David's timelines correctly, because obviously this is quite a unique case in the fact that he's coming over first and his family are joining after they finish their period of schooling. In Krakow itself, you have 2 schools. You have an international school and you do have a British international school. So in terms of 2 different types of education system, you're able to make sure they can have continuation on their exam process and their schooling going through the period that David's going to be in residence. I think what's interesting, one point when it comes to lease agreements in Poland is the fact that it does help if the company that David's worked from have a Polish entity. Because landlords are reluctant to sign for companies who don't have registration in Poland. However, we can get a guarantee system through, and also they would need to be present to sign any leases if he was taking his personal name, but perhaps that's something we can circle back in the Q&A. Having said that, though, it's very easy to have a power of attorney to cover all that, so that the flowing of the process can be really, really simple. We'd also recommend that our agent in relocation agent in Krakow would do an orientation to ensure that both David can get orientate himself as quickly as possible to be in post. And again, perhaps another half day for when his family reside in residence and have time to look at schools, etc. It may be necessary that we do a pre-orientation tour of the day. It may be worth investing the time and money in that so that the family can feel comfortable in what they need to do. And then, of course, the financial payments to secure any properties is very important. We recommended that the family take furnished properties. The stock's reasonably good. However, what we would also recommend is that they do a small household goods shipment. And as Neera said, it's very important that the immigration is in place. But we will need a passport copy, a visa, a work permit, work certificate, as Neera mentioned. And then we get things like bill of lading, bank guarantee, a comprehensive inventory of the goods and valued inventory, and a power of attorney for our colleagues within Poland who would be a household goods agent to clear the customs. We anticipate the process is very small, but we can't stress strongly how we would need to make sure that the timelines are accurate and that we know exactly what stage of the events that our colleagues in this webinar have done all the various bits that they need to do prior to us engaging with the relocation services. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. So Neera, sorry, we've got some questions, so we just need to try and work our way through these. So Neera, how onerous is it to go through the whole sponsorship application process?
Well, if you use us, it's not very onerous at all. It can be quite document heavy. There are various requirements that need to be met. If, like I mentioned, the company needs to be UK established, they need to be able to evidence that appropriately and show tax documents, for example. They need to have lease of premises. That's not so much a requirement these days because everyone's working from home. And then you have to follow the process. We work really closely with the Home Office, so we submit the application. If they have any questions, they won't refuse the application. They'll come to us first of all. If the application is prepared correctly and you follow the process, then it is actually quite a straightforward a process at the moment. But the processing times do take 12 weeks. They might be audited as well. So a company might be audited during that time. And that might have the Home Office visit premises to see whether you're actually performing as you should be as a company. But also at the same time, there's a fast track process available. So that could be processed, the application can be processed within a couple of weeks for an additional fee to the Home Office as well. So essentially, as long as it's put together correctly, the Home Office will look at it, so they'll come back for any information. But there are key requirements that need to be met, as I mentioned, in terms of the employee having to work there, being paid the correct salary, having the correct job, etc. So in terms of the process, it can be straightforward as long as you follow the requirements.
So so you have to apply for the sponsorship license every single time you get a different employee from overseas, or do you just do it once and then you do additional checks?
Correct. Yeah. So you apply for the license and then it's granted for 4 years. So during that time, you will have the ability to issue a certificate of sponsorship under the skilled worker route, as I mentioned. And it's a kind of a pay-as-you-go system. So every time you want to bring somebody over, then you can request the certificate of sponsorship from the Home Office and they will issue that. So you don't have to pay for a license every single time, but you have to make sure that you're compliant. So a lot of companies are like, great, let's get a sponsor license. and then the requirements are not met. So, for example, you have to make sure the person's being paid correctly, that you update the Home Office if their salary changes, if their job title changes. A lot of companies are wayward in not maintaining that, and they will have issues during the course of the license, which could mean that it's downgraded or the license is taken away even. So it's best to be careful throughout that period.
Okay, but I assume there's guidance, there's government guidance for this kind of stuff to help people once they've got the sponsorship license. Where do they go to get that guidance?
Yes, so there's on the government website, there is plenty of guidance, which in true Home Office fashion is quite confusing to interpret a lot of the time. So we have a lot of people who look at the guidance and then they'll come to us and say, we don't quite understand this, because essentially it is immigration law, and they've tried to simplify things over the years, again, to accommodate a new population of employers trying to recruit. But a lot of the time, the rules are misconstrued by employers, so they're not paying the correct salary levels. For example, every single job has a particular standard occupation code that needs to be met. So it's very easy to issue a certificate of sponsorship. As you can imagine, with the power to do this, a lot of employers can just click a button essentially and think, great, that's straightforward. But where the issue arises, when the individual's coming over from an overseas country and they apply for entry clearance, it could be refused because the requirements are not met. They're not paying the correct salaries, for example.
Okay, great. So what we're seeing a lot of now is that so that's obviously the inward stuff. So what we're seeing a lot of now is people saying that they want to put their employees overseas, and there's a number of reasons for that. And we're seeing more and more companies say to people, if you want to go and do your job remotely, you can. And those people saying, well, I want to go and do it in Spain, I want to do it in Italy, and companies are quite happy for this in principle. But it's the immigration side, and I'll come on to you in a second, Rachel, as well, and then to Ben and Andrew. But in terms of the process, you've made the UK one sound reasonably straightforward, but what's it like doing it the other way and doing it for those European countries?
It's not as straightforward. For once, UK is actually they're getting to the point of having a reasonably transparent system here, but there are many countries where it's not so transparent and it's still bogged down by a lot of red tape. And as I mentioned, in various countries, there's a lot of delays to be seen in terms of their processing. The UK does have a lot of fast track processes compared to some other countries. But for example, in Italy, it could take up to a year to 18 months to get a similar license, if you will, to sponsor individuals. So it's not as transparent in most European countries. And now with this additional requirement that most countries require British they're treated as a non-EU national now. So they're brought into the same kind of pool. There are many benefits prior to that. So companies have to kind of pre-plan any moves that they might have to Europe as well.
Okay, so you said earlier that for the UK companies to get a sponsorship license here, they have to have a registered company in the UK. So if you have somebody who just wants to go and work in Switzerland, but Switzerland's not a great example. If you want to go and work in Italy, for example, but you don't have a company out there, they just want to go and live there, is that going to pose more of an issue trying to get a visa for them?
Yes, exactly. So Italy will have similar restrictions in terms of obtaining a license in Italy before somebody can actually go and work there. They haven't kind of moved. The UK were kind of pushed forward to get a new points system in place because of Brexit, because of the media coverage, because of the political insight that it had onto it. So the UK had to find a new system, but other countries, they weren't bothered really. They were like, okay, you're just going to be put into the same queue as everybody else now. So Italy is another prime example of where there are extraordinary delays in terms of getting companies being able to sponsor Brits abroad.
Okay, thanks. Rachel, if I could just come on to you. So the one of the things that you talked about was the double I've lost it already. It was the double taxation thing, wasn't it? So the double charging and everything. So how easy is it for your existing payroll company to actually work this out?
So that particular example, obviously, would be looking at the UK, because the credit would be in the UK potentially. And actually, it's an application you have to, in the UK, you have to apply to HM Revenue and Customs to offer, or in order to apply for operation of payroll with the adjustment for the credit for taxes paid overseas. So relatively straightforward, but there is an admin process to follow in order to set it up. And secondly, you'd need to double check with your payroll provider. Most of them are fairly fairly up on this and you know, have come across it before. It's quite common. So, but yeah, you shouldn't really operate it without the agreement from HMRC.
Right. Okay. So one of the things, so Social Security over here, we kind of know, don't we, that if we pay our NI, it pays into our national health and it pays into our state pension in the future. If you end up paying, you said earlier about France, you know, the French Social Security is really high, is what you said. So
Yeah.
that if you end up, if one of your employees ends up in France and they end up stuck in the system and they have to pay the French Social Security, is there anything that you can say as an employer to try and sweeten the pill a bit? Is there something that, are they going to get something for it, or is it just a tax?
I mean, potentially at the very end, if they've contributed enough, then, or enough years. So in the UK, it's a years-based system. So, you know, you have to contribute for a certain number of years over your working life to get something. So if you're going for, you know, if you're only paying them for a year or so, then it's reasonably unlikely. So you know, that's why I was saying it's good to try and plan your move either as a more permanent move where you're going to be paying all the time, or coming back within the 2-year period, so you don't default into paying some host country social security. And in under the old rules, the extension would be granted, and although it was done on a yearly basis, I mean, I've seen them granted for several years. So you could have you know, 4 or 5 years worth of assignment on an extension, which you know covered a pretty long-term assignment anyway. So so I think this is going to become much more of an issue now with the 24 months and no extension, because before it was a problem that people didn't really need to think about, because it was all fine, another year and you're coming home after 3 years anyway. So yeah, I think it's going to be a point to think about in terms of assignment planning going forward.
Okay, great. And can you just explain a bit more detail about the gross stuff and the benefit in kind that you mentioned in the case study for Remy?
Yeah. So Remy was coming here on a tax equalised assignment, which essentially means that the company will pay any taxes due in the UK for her, and she'd be subjected to a stay-at-home tax. So essentially, what she would have paid in France had she not come on assignment to the UK. So she'd be no better, no worse off from a tax perspective as a result of her move to the UK. UK tax authorities, and indeed most of the rest of the world, state that if you're paying tax on behalf of your employee, then that's a benefit as well. So you need to gross it up. So you need to pay the tax on the tax. So if you're a 40% taxpayer in the UK, the gross up's 100 over 60 essentially. So you're paying not only the benefit, but a fairly high tax rate on top of that as well. So it does make for a fairly costly assignment if you're sending someone here on an equalised basis. But again, that's processed through pay. You can do the gross up through payrolls, and you know, it's fairly easy to do, but it does add a rather large cost to any move.
Okay, so Remy has to be worth it, really,
Yeah,
for her to for you to
she's
do this
getting
process.
a fairly generous package and loads of relocation and additional services, and they're going to have to gross it all up in the UK as well. So yeah, she's got to be worth it.
Okay, Neera, I've got a quick question on Remy as well about what you said about her son. So her son comes over with her, and he said he was 16. She's coming over for a couple of years. So by the time he gets to 18, he's probably reasonably well established in you know, in his home in Surrey or wherever we were. And is there anything that he gets? Is he able to apply for anything? Can he apply for any different types of visas after his stay here?
Yeah, funnily enough, because he can come to the UK as a dependent, he doesn't have to get any special work permission. It would just be on the back of her as a dependent, essentially. It's very straightforward. He can work and study. He can't work as a dentist in training, doctor or dentist in training, or as a sports person. But he's absolutely fine to stay here, essentially, in line with her visa, as long as that's carries on. If he decides to stay beyond, so he's 16 now, so say even 2-3 years time, he decides to stay on and mum decides to go back, then he would need to find his own visa in order to stay in the UK. But usually by that time, a lot of people, he might want to stay here as a student, for example, so he'd need to get a student visa. And as I mentioned, they didn't apply. The intra-company transfer doesn't allow for permanent residency, so he wouldn't be able to do that. So he can stay as a student, or even perhaps get his own work permission sorted out via an employer.
Right. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. There's Andrew. You talked about getting stuff over from the place in Paris and bringing it over here and stuff. So we're hearing loads of stories about things being backed up in customs and stuff not getting through. How is this impacting people with their domestic and their home stuff?
Well, obviously there is a backlog. Obviously, customs, both sides, the process has been stepped up a little bit, but it's nothing that we can't get over. But as you say, how is this affecting people in their households? As long as there's effective planning, as long as the timelines are set from the very start, and as long as obviously there is a destination and the new home coincides with the actual delivery or adequate storage is set up, there isn't any problem, to be honest. When I say delays, we're probably looking at half a day or an extra day maximum. The horror stories that you hear that trucks are backed up on the A2 and Pizza Express or Pizza Hut giving out free pizzas to all the drivers. That may have been in the first couple of days, but no, the HM Customs, the process is quite seamless now, and you're looking at just maybe half a day to a day. That's it now.
Okay, great. And what happens to Remy's cat and dog? How do they get here?
Well, I mean, obviously, obviously we can assist with that. Obviously, the actual pet would need a passport, and obviously it would need a rabies chip. Or a rabies injection and a microchip, but obviously, we can assist with that too. We're not just a household goods provider. We can provide services and solutions for all sorts of pets and animals. So yeah, it's not a problem.
Okay, so in terms of Remy, then, so we heard from you and Ben. Both you said that the visa and everything has to be in place before before you get involved at all. So assuming that the visa gets in, there's how long is your process? How long does it take?
Okay, so the household goods from Paris to London, dependent on the size of the shipment, dependent on the amount of effects that we're going to be packing and transporting, it can take up to 10 days. So if you're looking at a very large property in Paris, it can take up to 10 days. With regards to finding a home, obviously we're dependent on the actual stock, what properties are available online, what properties are available in the marketplace. So obviously when I say 10 days door to door, obviously the home search, the virtual or the physical home search would have already been completed by that. So I would say safely, if you plan 3 weeks to a month, to relocate your employee from Paris to London, that should be ample. 4 weeks maximum.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. So so we've got Mario. So Mario, we're gonna allow you to speak because you've raised your hand. So Mario, do you want to come off mute and ask a question?
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
I'm not sure I'm getting. Are you seeing me on video? I'm not sure I'm on. But anyway.
No, we're not.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to dovetail to Andrew's comment on transit time, because we are obviously a removal company that's doing a lot of EU work to and from the EU. From a UK standpoint, we've experienced very little issues, because fundamentally coming into the UK, it's pretty straightforward. Leaving the UK, it just requires a T form to execute, which we are very familiar with. But however, the issue we've experienced is that certain countries, including Germany and Spain, were late into the game of adapting the rules of importation of household goods. And just to explain it, technically, to enter household effects into the EU, you need to be away from the EU for more than 12 months, okay? Now, obviously, if someone lives in Singapore or New York and they're coming into the UK, or I'm sorry, not the UK anymore, but into France or Spain, that's possible because they've lived away from the country. But how can you move a family from the UK to Europe, to continental Europe today, having been away from the EU for 12 months? It's impossible. So we, for the first quarter of this year, we experienced significant issues, especially in Spain, because the Spanish authorities would not recognize the fact that, yes, the UK has just recently left the EU, and they were applying the rules of the 12 months. And they expected every single removal coming into Spain to be subject to duties and taxes, which amount to about 32% of the value of the CIF value, which is the cost, insurance, and freight value of the goods. Now, over time, we managed to overcome these issues, but I can tell you right now that transit time remains an issue only because of clearance on arrival. And you do queue up, not on the M20 or any other highway you thought this was an issue, but we do queue up to clear customs. And in Paris, it takes hours. In Madrid, it takes hours. And therefore, when you measure waiting time for customs, you're really adding at least 1 and possibly even 2 days for clearance. So the departure of our fleet towards Europe is delayed by about 5 days. And the reason for it is we can't get the crew stuck at destination over the weekend.
Okay,
So,
Marriott, I'm going to stop you there because we've got an awful lot to get through. But thanks for your comments. I'm going to ask Ben to jump in and wade into that one. But thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Yeah, we saw the same thing. I mean, at one point, especially early on when Brexit, when the changes happened, we were paying duties to get very smaller shipments, and we were recommending that companies take groupage shipments, in, especially Spain. Our box chain brand, which is our consumer brand for household goods, was basically, we would recommend that people pay the duties. Now, that's fine when you've got a very small value shipment, but as Mario was saying, quite valid, that, you know, when it becomes a good household, then you know it's going to cost a lot of money. But you know, I think as long as you brief your clients and the corporate client and everybody's aware of the issues, again, you know, we are seeing a slight delay in transit, and there's the cases, the study cases here. You know, we're looking at probably a day, as Mary's quite right, could be up to a day and a half. I mean, you know, for instance, with David, I'd probably recommend a groupage anyway, because there's no timelines on it. And as Andrew said, you know, for Remy coming into the UK, a day of delay is probably correct. But Mary's quite right. We are seeing a very fluctuating system when it comes to what paperwork's recognised, that's for sure. And we basically take it on a case-by-case basis. But we did initially have a lot of removal companies who didn't really want to go to Europe for a while. And now, you know, we have the COVID situation where, you know, it's all good and well as long as you're not positive. If you're coming back to the UK and your driver becomes positive, you have to wait for 10 days in a car park in Calais to make sure that they're not positive. So that's also a deferring factor. So yeah, good point, Marianne. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. So, Andrew, you talked about stock and houses and over here. So we've obviously seen a massive house boom. The fact that we've seen the stamp duty holidays finishing and all that sort of stuff, isn't it? How's that impacting on people coming to the UK?
Well, as I said, the stock is low for a start. Especially in certain areas, the Surrey, the Kew, the Richmond, the Twickenham areas, stock is nearly non-existent. The Hertfordshire areas, the St Albans, exactly the same. Obviously, as you said, the stamp market holiday, everyone's moving. A lot of landlords are returning from overseas as well, and basically wanting their properties back. So the rental market, is not non-existent, but I would say that 45% of properties are let within the first week, and some properties are let before they even get onto Rightmove or onto the market. It really is that fast moving at the moment.
Yeah, we're just, if I can interject, we're just having, our teams are spending a lot of time researching the market, and lucky enough, I've got a piece of software which enables us to be alerted if anything new comes on the market. But that being said, it all comes down to the professional relationships you have with the chains of agents who will contact you before it goes onto the general public market, so you can service the corporate client. Lucky for us, we have a great relationship with a lot of the agents, and there's people in our organisation work really hard to make sure that happens on a day-to-day basis. And I can tell you now, what goes on behind the scenes research is a very laborious task. It takes a lot of time, and there are people in our organisation who are really, really good at this. And without it, we won't be able to do what we do. And the other side is we've got the perfect storm really everywhere, because as Andrew said, you've got returning expats, You've got people, if you take Singapore, where people can't move out at the moment, for most places in the world are okay coming to the UK. And what that means is people come to end their leases, and what do? So you've got a lot of pressures everywhere on the stock. And obviously in the US, the market's buoyant, the domestic market's through the roof. You can't actually get a removal truck, the domestic mover, when it suspects this precise moment, because they're all at capacity, which means the markets are hot. And when we say the markets are hot, we really mean sort of the genuine expat markets, the financial hubs in the world where we all move all these assignees to and from.
Okay, great. Well, on the back of that, then, so I'm gonna have to ask you for some like direct advice here, because if Neera's done her job and she's got the visas and all that's done, and then they come to you, and then you say, well, actually, we've got all this lack of stock and delays and stuff like that. What's your advice? Is it come over, get a smaller place, and then try and find a more permanent place when you get here?
I think, to be honest, what we've seen is twofold. I mean, at the end of the day, with the regulations to do with COVID and coming in and quarantining your own residence, it's very important. We've had people that have actually chosen their property through virtual home searches as well around the world. Obviously, the removal survey can be done over video. The technology is linked, because of COVID. Obviously, technology has been increased in terms of how we're using it and the quality of it. So I don't really see that as a problem. It's just making sure that how early we know that Neera's completed what we need, then we jump on it. And, the other side is, you've got assignees who are sitting in their accommodation quarantining, especially in the UK, who are going online as well. So we have to manage their expectations. There's a lot of time managing everybody's expectations, including the corporate client as well as the assignee on the ground. And we've done a great job so far. I mean, obviously, there's always situations where we have to put an offer in, and you're obviously offering with a property which another assignee is obviously offering with as well. We do what we can. But I think as long as we're communicating, and I think at the end of the day, you can have all the best top technology in the world, but without qualified and experienced teams behind the scenes who know what they're doing, it's a blend of both the best worlds. And I think most of the home searches that we do these days are hybrid. And also, again, getting people's temporary accommodation correct so that they've got the right, they can stay there for 10 days if they're going to an apart hotel, whatever it is in the world. But also making sure they have the right to extend that as well if they don't find a property. Just make sure that their initial contract is set correctly so they don't have the angst of having to leave a property when they haven't found a long-term property. And that's something that we do recommend that all our clients do.
Okay, great.
I was just going to add to that, that in terms of the start date, for example, for visas, they can be changed. So the person is initially gets a 3-month entry visa to the UK, but we're often having conversations because of situations where it's not so flexible to change start dates, and they can be done quite easily in terms of somebody relocating to the UK and starting work. There's a lot of flexibility, especially with COVID at the moment.
Okay, so what about COVID stops? Is that flexibility still going to stay there?
I believe so. I mean, there is already flexibility. So the individual has 3 months once the certificate has been issued to come to the UK, first of all. But for example, if that visa runs out because they haven't been able to travel because of COVID, they can always get a new visa without having to go through the whole process anyway. And I think that will continue even after COVID.
Okay, what about the other way? So what about when we're sending people to Europe? Do we still have the same level of flexibility?
No. Again, we don't get that in a lot of countries. They're very restrictive. Again, we're treated as any other non-EU national. So a lot of the time you have to go through the process again. You have to obtain a new visa. So that the same flexibility isn't afforded to most European countries.
Okay, so I've got to ask. So when one of your clients rings you up and says, we want to send somebody to X, what's your nightmare X? What's the nightmare country that you think, oh, not this again, I can't face it? Is there any of those, or are they all pretty much the same?
I would say would be Italy. Unfortunately, the processes are very disorganized. A lot of delays in those countries. Again, in terms of flexibility, for Italy, unfortunately, it's not there, and even more so because we're out of Europe.
Right, and what about the ones that you think, oh, this will be okay, because this is quite a good one?
UK, obviously.
Are there any other European countries that you think actually it's relatively straightforward to get through there?
I guess Poland is quite straightforward, and Switzerland quite straightforward as well.
Well, I suppose Switzerland, we've been used to Switzerland, haven't we? Because nothing's really changed, has it? It's been the same. It's been the same process because they haven't been in it, right? Okay.
Exactly.
And Ben, I was going to ask you as well about the same question. So obviously you do this for the whole world, don't you? But specifically for the EU countries, like, are there any that are relatively straightforward to get into, and there are any that aren't?
I think the EU is pretty much quite straightforward for them. I mean, you know, the home search in Italy can be a little bit chaotic. Let's be honest, and the paperwork behind it. But having said that, I think for Europe, it's not really. For us, it's more the African countries that can cause more of an issue, because, you know, if you take something like Rwanda, it doesn't really have a bona fide relocation business. It's not really something that's in place. So you go through the real estate agents, and it can be quite problematic. And then you've got places like Nigeria, which are really, really expensive, believe it or not. The costs are through the roof. But yeah, I mean, you know, we're always up for a challenge, put it that way, and you never stop being challenged in what we do, that's for sure.
Okay, great. Okay, we've got somebody else who's raised their hand, so I'm just going to take them off. So is it Jar?
It's Jair.
Okay, great. Over to you. What would you like to ask?
Thanks. I have one question for Rachel with regard to social security. So let's say you have a UK resident who goes to the Netherlands for like 1.5 years. You apply for a certificate of coverage. Well, one of the effects of that the health insurance stays in the UK. So how would it work if something happens in the Netherlands and he has to get help in the Dutch hospital? How would he be able to get his coverage for social security for the health insurance? Sorry, in the UK.
Yeah. So obviously historically you'd have what was, I think, the EHIC card, which I think has been possibly been replaced. So all he'd have to prove really, which it really is that, you know, he's entitled to it by continuing to pay in the UK, and he's obviously exempt in the Netherlands. So you know, you get all the certificates, etc., when the certificate of coverage is issued. So as far as I'm aware, it's not been an issue to prove ongoing entitlement in the European country.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Perfect. Okay, great. All right, thanks very much. Okay, we're gonna. I think we're gonna wrap up now, because we could talk about this stuff all day, and it's been incredibly interesting. I really do want to thank Nira, Rachel, Ben, and Andrew for their contributions. It's been incredibly insightful, and like I said, we'll distribute the recording around, and we'll send some other material. And if you want to get in touch with any of the speakers today, and we'll supply the contact details so you can, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you. Yeah, thank you very much. Take care. Bye bye.